Okay, Dennis Hall here. Um, I've just reviewed three tapes that I did, all about a half an hour long, talking about the sort of the the business of the homestead and how all that played out and ended. And I kind of I realised that I was avoiding telling the end of the story because it was a little bit contentious, and I guess I wasn't. So I went away to think about it, and as it is, it looks as though I've thought about it for about 3 years, but it's still in my head, and my old memories, my younger memories are not very good at all, but as in recent ones, but my old memories are a little bit clouded now as well. So I need to, but I do find when I'm talking about them, they do tend to come back. So I'm going to do that now. It doesn't matter to me how long it takes. The thing was that um, the homestead, and the odd things about the homestead that people that I kind of know about, and I need to remember, and I need to recount them here. And one of them was the fact that we had that unusual lease on it. It was a peppercorn lease, and we'd actually paid $60,000 or something for it. I think we offered 50 and ended up paying 60 or $65,000 back in 1977. So a lot of money. Could have bought three houses back then for that. And so we were there for 23 in 1977 until 1999, when the trust took action against me to break the lease. And you kind of have to wonder why. But I sort of, in conversations with Kevin Mackay, who was the then chairman of that trust and obviously the lawyer for the trust, and I got on very well with him, which always kind of surprised me because, he was sort of initiating action against me from time to time. But I kind of realised that he wasn't doing it of his own volition. He was being pushed into it by the beneficiary of the estate. Now, I'm not going to mention her name, but she is a woman, and she is the beneficiary of the Aurora estate, and I don't know whether she's still alive or not, and I don't fucking care. And because, this is the kind of end of my story that I'm going to tell. That'll be the end of my story about the Aurora homestead. Now, the thing was that at every turn that I saw of the history of the homestead, there was talk of demolition. They were always talking about it being demolished. And there was only two people or two entities, if you like, who were able to call for its demolition. And one of them was Kevin Mackay, who was the head of the Aurora Trust. And clearly, considering he'd put a sort of 45-year lease on it, he didn't want it demolished. And the other one was Caroline Rolliston, who was the beneficiary. And she definitely wanted it knocked down. Now, I didn't know why at the time. It was all a mystery to us. We heard these sort of stories. But see, I know now, and I'm going to start out this whole thing with the reason why she wanted the place demolished. Her father committed suicide there. Now, I have, and so, I feel for him because he was a war hero and he'd been through a lot during the war and whatever. But he'd come back to New Zealand, and I think it was 1953 or 52 when he topped himself. And this big story was made up about a tractor accident. So the thing about the tractor accident that killed him was that I always accepted that story, and then I got a phone call probably 2 years ago at Christmas from some geezer who didn't identify himself, which is a problem. Didn't identify himself, but he said to me, "Is that Dennis Hall?" And I said, "Yes." And he said one sentence, and that was this: Christopher Rollison didn't die in a tractor accident. He committed suicide, and he hung up. Right. So what I did then, I thought of, I just wondered why the hell somebody would do something. Why would somebody do something like that if it weren't true? It seems like a very sort of the kind of malicious thing that a 15-year-old might do. But this was a grown man. This was a man, well-spoken man, and sounded like in his 60s to me. So I went and checked. Well, what's the first thing you do? Well, you go looking for a death certificate. Death certificate said, and you can find these documents. And so the death certificate said that he had died of asphyxiation, and that he had lividity around his neck and up the side of his face. And so, that ties in with a sort of a bungled hanging, if you know what I mean. That's what it does for me. And so, and it's there, it's still there. So then I went to the coroner's report, and I could kind of, they had to get that from an archive down in the South Island somewhere, but I did get it. I can't, but this would have been 3 years ago. And I've sort of held this all in for the last 3 years, and I thought, today I just thought, fuck it, I'm going to tell this bloody story, because I'm going to be gone soon, and I'm going to leave this behind. And there was the business of not hurting the family and not hurting Christopher's reputation, but Christopher committed suicide, and I believe now. So the other little anomaly in this whole bloody story that can be seen today just by anybody who wants to go and look is that the wooden lights in the ballroom at the homestead, or in the billiard room, the two wooden lights in the middle of the ceiling have been sawn off. You always ask yourself, why would they do that? Why would they? And it's been done by a tradesman, because it's a good, neat, even cut. They're both cut off exactly the same. It would be pretty tricky to cut them right up there by the ceiling, but they've been cut off properly. Why would they do that? And I now believe the reason they cut those lights down is because Christopher Rolleston had hung himself from them. So to me, that's just putting, obvious bits of evidence that you can actually see with your own eyes together, and take them and put them with the coroner's report and the death certificate, and see what you come up with. You come up with the same as me. What would Mrs. Rolleston, who was still alive then, what would she do if her son had hung himself from one of those lights? She couldn't destroy the whole building, but she would want them gone. So they've been sawn off and taken away. And so that to me, that just explained all that, And so every time there's been, so before we to go further back in the story, when we were in the process of looking at buying it, we bought a leasehold on it, right? And so we talked to this Colin Baxter, who owned it at the time. A very, very unpleasant man he was. I always remember him as an absolute cunt. He's a real bastard. I didn't like him at all. But anyway, and I don't care what I was saying naughty words, but whatever. So Colin Baxter, and he made life when we sort of got into the process of trying to buy the lease from him, he made it very difficult. He was a nasty piece of work. And I don't care what his kids or anybody else think. Their father was an asshole, a very nasty man to deal with. And we had to deal with him through the purchasing of that lease, And so but one of the things he told us, so he was the first we talked to about in the house, was that it had been up for demolition when he had signed that lease. Right, he had signed that lease with Kevin Mackay. Kevin Mackay was the lawyer from Mackay, Roebuck and what's his name, up there in Waipawa. And so he drafted that lease. Now, he didn't want it demolished, but his beneficiary did. But she was still not old enough to make that decision. So what did he do? He knew that as soon as she was 21, she would have it bowled. So before she turned 21, he put a bloody 50-odd year lease on it. And not only was an interest-free lease, it was a peppercorn lease. Because, he might have had trouble, getting somebody to take up a 20-year lease if they were going to have to pay something. So what did Kevin Mackay want to do? All he wanted to do was protect the building. So he figured that if he gave it to someone else who seemed trustworthy, they would probably look after the building for 20 years. Which, do you know what I mean? I think it might have been more than, might have been 30 years, I don't know. Can't remember. Look it up. And so So for me, this whole story has not really been told, except, I mean, I've written about it a bit and whatever, but it's sort of, I want to, I've got this YouTube channel that I'm going to leave behind. I don't know that I'm here that much longer for this world, so I want to make sure this part of the story is told before I bloody pop my clogs. And so Kevin Mackay, Kevin Mackay for a long time, he felt to me like he was my boss, and a difficult one at that. But as I look at it, after the years I've been gone from there, I realised that he was running interference between me, the tenant, and Caroline Rolliston, the beneficiary, because we wanted it to stay there and she wanted it demolished. But the demolition story would turn up, with monotonous regularity. And I just think, why would anybody want to do that? And the only reason why she wanted it done is because her father committed suicide there. And so, but the community had all stood behind a bullshit story that he died in a tractor accident. He didn't. And so he might have hung himself in the yard. He might have taken a gun out. I don't believe he would have done it with a gun because it would have been noisy, messy. Everybody would have talked about it. And why would he hang himself in the stables or something? Because he had to be found by the family. And so, if you know what I mean, because if Mrs. Rolliston if he hung himself in the ballroom, or the billiard room as it was, if he hung himself in there, he would be found by a member of the family, and they would call the doctor and the police, and then they could organise a cover-up and a cover story, which is what they did. If he had hung himself out in the yard and the farmhands found him, it would have been different. They wouldn't have been it would have been beyond their control. So I believe that Christopher's story, I believe I'm telling the final truth of Christopher's story. And Christopher deserves it to be told. And I do believe that something, and it could have been his war service, because he did. He was in World War II. He was in the Grenadier Guards. Go and look him up. You can't, if he was in the Grenadier Guards and went through World War II, and you can't write him off with a simple tractor story. It's not fair. That denies his history. Because that becomes his entire history. Oh, what happened to Chris Rolliston? I drove a tractor over a bank and died. Don't believe it. And so I always wondered about that, because if he was a tank commander, you'd know how to drive a bloody little tractor. Give us a break. So for me, I've been wrestling with that for quite a long time, and it's a truth that I needed to tell, because I believe that the person who called me to tell me 2 years ago, it was Christmas 2 years ago, I think, might have been 3, and I've been carrying that around for a long time, like he obviously had as well, and I've written about it a bit, but that's not going to go anywhere. It's all in stuff that I'll probably never be able to get published, but this will be published on YouTube. And so it'll be there. And so anybody wants to go and have a look at and it's called Milton Smirk, because that's a sort of an alter ego of mine. It's a name I dreamed up, Milton Smirk. And so my YouTube channel is called Milton Smirk, and this will be on it. And so there's sort of, I'm 83 now, and my memory struggles a bit, but I know that there was sort of some connecting tissue between all of this that I can't quite remember, and I'm probably going to need to make some notes. But and I'll probably make some notes that'll come out of this, because I know what'll happen. I'll go to bed tonight, and this will be in my head, and a whole lot of more, because I had been kind of planning this for the last few days, but I didn't really. I was sort of planning to write it down. But I haven't done that. I'm running out of time. I've just cleaned up my computer and had a look at the earlier sort of voice files like this that I've done, and I just thought, Jesus, Dennis, get it over and done with, sit down and do it now. And so I think there's sort of this the punctuation of this story is from when we first arrived, I suppose. Colin Baxter told us that Christopher Rolleston had died in a tractor accident. Then when we moved in, all the locals told us the same story. Christopher Rolleston died in a tractor accident. And of course, I just accepted it, you know. Why would I not? We all just repeated the story to anybody who wanted to listen. Christopher Rolleston died in a tractor accident. But then, you know, and so the next punctuation mark for me was when they took action against us to break the lease. Now, Kevin Mackay had set that lease up, and so it cost him $460,000 to break it, and that was in 1999. And so he was being at that time. That was around the time when his beneficiary attained her majority, and she could overrule him. And she just said, "Take, you know, I'm the beneficiary. You're just the caretaker of the estate. Take Dennis Hall to court and get him out of the homestead." And so Kevin Mackay didn't try and do it. He had his own law firm in. See, this is the other thing, I'm remembering stuff. Kevin Mackay has got his own law firm in Waipawa, and Mackay, Roebuck, and somebody else. And so he could have. I mean, he knew I had no money. I mean, we knew each other quite well. I was absolutely open about the state of my finances, and I'd managed to. He always saying to me, "You have to paint the house," and I've painted the fucking thing twice since I've been there. You guys never painted it in 50 years, and so it's in good. You know, I mean, some of the wallpaper's old, but what do you want me to do? If I take the wallpaper off, all the lath and plaster falls to bits, so it'd all have to be relined, the whole place. That old wallpaper is necessary to keep the bloody plaster in place, because go and look up lath and plaster. It's made out of limes like a lime cement, which crumbles in your hand. It's not like concrete. People need to know, and so I'm losing my place, and I'm losing my place because I got memory issues now as well, which is the reason for sitting down and doing this today. And I'm up to 17 minutes, and I sort of. But anyway, so Kevin Mackay, every time there was any interaction with them and it looked like I might be gone, this demolition story came up again. Why would they want to demolish it? And so when they did finally get rid of us, now I remember the other bit. Kevin Mackay's law firm in Waipawa could have done the job to get me out for a fraction of what it actually cost them. But he didn't do that. She wanted it demolished. She had her majority. She was old enough to tell him what she wanted, and he had to obey her. So he said, "Oh, okay, well, we'll get a good law firm to do that." So he got Simpson and Grierson in Auckland to take up this business of breaking the lease. That cost him $460,000. Mackay Roebuck could have done it for 60. Just could have. But 460 grand. And so what happens? So we're thrown out. They win the court case. Of course they did. And so the $460,000 is the amount to Simpson Grierson. What's the amount to Mackay Roebuck? Because they're facilitating all this. And I reckon it was out of Kevin Mackay's control. I just do. And I put a time on for when I should stop. So Kevin Mackay was, he had his own agenda, and his agenda was he wanted to protect the homestead. So, one of the ways to protect the homestead was put the homestead in debt for $500,000 because someone had to pay it. And I believe that the Orowara Trust didn't have $500,000 to spare for a fancy law firm in Auckland. So what did they do? They had to sell the property. So as soon as they sold the homestead property, which I tell you, they got $460,000 for it. A year before, we had offered them $370,000 for it. and that's with the lease on it. And they didn't even respond. And why? Because, Caroline wanted it destroyed. She wanted it gone because her daddy hung himself from one of the lights in the bloody ballroom. And otherwise, why? Otherwise, why the fuck else would they get a tradesman to come in and saw the lights off the ceiling? Doesn't make sense. Just, the whole thing doesn't. The only way it can make any sense is when you realise that the lights were cut down because Christopher Rolliston hung himself from those lights. Nobody else has told me that. I have not heard that secret from anybody. It's a well-kept secret. They still tell a silly story about the tractor accident. Oh, they do. I checked his death certificate. He died of asphyxiation, and he had marks around his neck. Fucking simple stuff. Go and look. Don't believe me. Go and look for yourself. All that sort of stuff's still available. I think they had to source it from somewhere a long way away. And I just thought, what did it say? It said he died of asphyxiation and he had lividity around his neck. What does that mean? It means it was a botched hanging, because if he was able to do a proper hanging, he would break his neck and die instantly, but he didn't. The poor bastard died of strangulation. Just did. And, somebody has to tell the story. I'm going to be dead soon. You can't do anything to me because I've too far gone. And I've had to live it all. I lived it all. I've been through it all. I've watched it all. I've figured it all out. I mean, I spent a lot of time in that ballroom at the homestead, and I'd look at those bloody lights that have been cut off the ceiling, and I'd think, why the fuck would anybody do that? What possible reason could there be for sawing those bloody beautiful wooden lights that would be of the same quality as the rest of that ceiling? Why the fuck would they saw them off? Oh, Christopher Rolliston hung himself from them. Well, that explains that. So, this, at some point in the future, I don't know, I'll be dead or whatever, and it might be next week. Depends, I suppose. But so at some point in the future, somebody's going to see this and go, you can't do that, Dennis. You can't tell that story. Yes, I fucking can. It's my story. It's the one that I made up about Christopher Rolliston, because, the one that I've heard from all you guys is absolutely made up. But my one has got some evidence to support it. So get fucked. All of you people. All of you. I think that, Christopher Rolliston's pain has been denied for years and years. I'm not going to do that. No. I've never heard anybody say that he was in the Grenadier Guards. I found that out by researching him. Well, and people are not going to research some guy who died in a bloody, rolled a Ferguson tractor over a bank. Give me a break. And so I had a Ferguson tractor for a long time. I don't know what it's like driving those. So I'm up to 23 minutes and 30 seconds. I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to go back and review it. But by and large, I think that I've said what I needed to say. I'll make some notes, which I should have done before I started this. And as for people like Caroline, who might see me talking about her father like this, I just think I got more respect for your father than all the people who tell lies about him. I just do. He was in the Grenadier Guards. He was in a tank regiment. He would have fought in Europe, and he would have come away with some damage, some emotional and mental damage from World War II, like a lot of other people. And I don't know what happened, but something happened to cause him to top himself. This shit happens. But, to try and run a sort of generations-long lie about his life and death is, eventually someone like me is going to pop up and do this. So I'm not smiling. I don't think anything at all about Christopher's death is amusing. He's a person I would like to have met. And I think that you've got to look at why Kevin Mackay ran the estate the way that he did. and I'm telling you right now that it was what he did to protect the homestead, because he knew that Caroline wanted it destroyed, and Mrs. Rolliston, who was his friend, wanted it kept. Bye. Oh, by the way, it's the 15th of June, my birthday in a couple of days.